that in your classroom. You can watch the rest of that movie. I have a question for you. There were choices that were to be made on the type of house. What were the choices? You remember? What were the choices? Just one. Just give me one of the choices. What was one of the choices? Straw. They built out of straw. Pigs were able to choose, and one who said that was available was straw. Yes. A brick house. We've got a straw house. We've got a brick house. What else do we have? And we have a stick house. Now, let's see if you can hear exactly all that they were talking about, those three types of houses, because they were trying to get the pigs to buy their house. What did they say? What did the straw person say why he should buy his house? Do you remember? What did they say? Why should he buy his house? Can't remember? Because it smells like house, and it smells good. So it's supposed to be, okay? What else did they say about that? Pardon? The straw house. What did they say about the straw house? Why they should buy the straw house? Why should they choose it? Pardon me? It's a low price. It was cheap, right? Okay, good. Can you think of one other thing that they said was why they should buy the straw house? It was energy efficient, okay? Energy efficient, okay? Those are the reasons. Now, what about the brick house? What did they say about the brick house? Yes. Oh, remember? Okay, what? It was strong as brick, so that was good. Okay, what else? No, you was going to say, what else did they say about the brick house? Okay, so it was strong. Okay, is what he was saying. What else did he say? One more important thing that he said about that brick house, that he said, here's why you should choose my brick house. Yes, you're strong like bricks. Okay, one more thing. What? Yes?
Okay, it was built on the beach.
It was built on the beach, yes. And then one other thing he said that he could build it, what? Slow? Or did he say fast? Okay, so he could build it fast. Now the stick home. What did they say? Why did you choose the stick home? Because it would stand up, okay? Anything else that you remember about what it said about the stick house? Yes? Pardon? Hard. It was hard, okay? Do you remember? A good foundation. Good. That was great listening. Now let's see what happened with what house did they choose. We all make choices every day. See, they made a choice, each of them, to the type of house that they wanted to live in. And when the floods came, we saw what happened with two of those choices that was made. The house that stood was the one that was built on a firm foundation. You and I make choices every day. We make choices whether we're going to do our homework. And not only do we make a choice on doing our homework, but how well we do our homework. We make choices about obeying our teacher, or whether or not we're going to obey our teacher or our parents. You see, we make choices every day. And this morning, Mr. Wilber wants to talk a little bit about the importance of the choices we make in our life, and one very important choice that we make in our life. And so what I need for you to do is just to watch me and pay attention for a few more minutes as I share with you why we have chosen the verse that we have to learn this school year. When I was a little boy at 5 years old, I remember very clearly making a choice to ask Jesus into my life. I can still see the picture in my mind when I knelt down by with my mother and asked Jesus into my life. Because I believed in Jesus. Not everyone has that kind of a story, and I understand it. But for me, that was a decision, a choice that I made at 5 years old. There's another choice I made when I was 8 years old. And this one wasn't a good choice. We lived out on a farm in the upper part of Michigan, and on that farm, we had rabbits, and the neighbor had sheep. So that meant that we had an area of fields that had no trees on them, but was wide open. As a matter of fact, it was 300 acres. And part of my responsibility each week was to go and burn the trash. Now, again, it's a whole lot different than most of what you experience, because what you have a garbage truck that comes and picks up your trash. Well, we didn't have a garbage truck to come pick up our trash. And so part of what my job was as an 8-year-old boy was to go burn the trash. Well, where we burned the trash was out past the house and near the barn, but it was a big circle, and they had stones around the circle. And that's where I was to put all the papers and light the match and then start the fire. One day in August, I'm telling you August, because you need to know August is a month that's usually very hot. And usually in August, everything gets dry. So I went out one day to start the fire. And I started the fire, and I had 2 baskets worth of things that I needed to burn. And so I would get the fire going, and I'd throw a few pieces of paper on and get those burning. Then I'd throw a few more pieces on, and so forth, to the point of where all of a sudden I was having a pretty good fire. It was about the flames were about that hot. And I thought, what would it be like to get a big fire? So I made a choice to put 2 baskets worth of paper on top of the fire that was already going. Now, can you imagine what happened? And all of a sudden, the fire was out of the ring that we built of stone and was starting to burn just a little bit on all the dry grass that was outside. And it wasn't long before that whole field was on fire. 300 acres. And then beyond the acres was a big forest, and beyond the forest and in the forest were homes. Now, fortunately, the fire department was able to get there quick enough before the fire got to the woods. That was not a good choice, was it? You see, each day we each make choices. And sometimes those choices aren't well thought out. Just like mine was not thought out. And I made, again, a decision to do something that I didn't think about what would happen if it did what it ended up doing. Another time in my life, when I was 11 years old, I remember realizing that I wanted to serve Jesus with my life. And I promised to God that I would serve Him no matter what it was with my job. My job would be a job that would be helping people and encouraging people and telling them about Jesus. And I said that's what I wanted to do at 11 years old. And I remember that very clearly in my life. Now, have I always lived out that choice? No. There are times in my life where I have wanted to do things my way instead of God's way. But you see, those are choices that we make. And that's why it's important for you to understand this morning a choice that's very important in your life. And that's why we have chosen this year verse. And I would like the year verse up there again. What's important to understand with this year verse is it says Jesus answered. Jesus answered. Now that means if He answered, there must have been some kind of question, right? So when we look at the verses before this verse, we begin to understand a little bit more of what was going on, why Jesus answered the question. And we have to understand something, and this is something that's very difficult sometimes at our age to understand. But here's what was happening. Jesus had followers, the disciples. Those followers had been with Him for 3 years, day and night, learning about Him and the ways that He believed that they should live. Then all of a sudden, near the end of those 3 years, Jesus said something. And what he says to his disciples is, I'm going to leave you. You can imagine what they had to have felt like when all of a sudden the person they were following, the one that they began to understand, this is the kind of life that they can live, all of a sudden the leader, him being Jesus, says, I'm going to leave you. And they start asking questions. What do you mean by you're going to leave us? And he says, I'm going to a place that you cannot yet come, which means he's saying, hey, I'm going out away from you. Now, for me, I would begin to say, okay, you're going to another country? I mean, that's where my head would go. But all of a sudden, then you have one disciple who says, Lord, I will follow you no matter where you go. And Jesus says, sorry, you can't go where I'm going. And that other disciple says, well, then tell us what's the way to get to you. What is that way that we can follow? And that's when Jesus answers the question, what's the way? He says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So the disciples all of a sudden had to look at something that was happening in their life, and they were upset. And you can understand why they would be upset. It's kind of like if your mom and dad all of a sudden said they were leaving you, and what that would mean to you. Here's something that's very special to them, and he said he was leaving you. And then here's what happened next. They all said they would follow him even to the point of death. They would die because they believed him. And it wasn't but a few days later, all of a sudden, things happened that turned their world upside down. All of a sudden, Jesus was arrested. And then Jesus was taken to the cross. And Jesus was killed. And here's what happened. Those men who said they were going to follow him no matter what, they got scared. Matter of fact, they even said that they weren't a follower of his. This is what happened. Someone who said they would follow him to the end to the point of death for themselves. All of a sudden, when he was arrested, boom, they changed their mind. They made a choice to not want to be even then identified or known as a follower of Jesus. But here's what's beautiful. You see, we know that Jesus rose again. And several times Jesus came back to his disciples to prove to them that he had risen again. And obviously, our world has been turned upside down because those disciples all of a sudden realized that what he said was true, that he was the way, that he was life. And our world, we are sitting here today because of what happened in their lives. You see, here's the point. There was a choice that they made to not be a follower of his and even being known as a follower, but then they made another choice after they began to fully know that he said he would do what he said he would do. They made a choice to say, I'm going to follow because I believe. Let me tell you something right now. Hear me real quick. I want us to be careful when we look at the disciples and how we can become what we call judgmental. You mean you say you're a follower of Jesus and then you deny him? How could you do that? We do that every day. And that's why I think there's two lessons to be learned from what happened in the disciples' life. One, we need to sometimes look at ourselves and say, wait a minute, I need to quit being so hard on myself and realizing that I can mess up. Mr. Wilber messes up. He still makes bad choices today. Because Jesus again showed that he forgave his disciples, he forgives me. The second thing I learned from that is I need to be very careful when I start looking and judging somebody else and saying that they're not doing something right and I'm better than what they are. You see, Jesus came along and helped the disciples understand, I still love you even though you denied me. He does the same for you and I. That's why on my desk is this stone. That's my reminder. That's the word Jesus. It's my reminder. Don't be throwing stones at people and judging people when you know how bad you have been and how wrong you have done. But Jesus calls, and this is what also is very special about these passages, and I trust your teachers will help you look at all. In between those passages, before he answers that question, before Jesus answers that question, in between there, before that's said, one of the verses says this: a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another It's I have loved you. That others will know that I am loved. See, that right in between all of that was going on. Here's where the disciples all of a sudden, yeah, we follow Jesus, we'll do everything we can for you, and all of a sudden they deny him. Jesus says we still need to show love. And these are choices, boys and girls, that we make every day. Parents, adults, these are choices we make every day. Are we going to love as Jesus tells us to love, or are we going to stand in judgment of other people? And Jesus calls us to make sure that we're demonstrating and being the ones who love others. That's our challenge. That's why we spend the time we do at Troy Christian, is to talk about, as followers of Jesus, we are to show love to one another. Jesus then tells us and he promises, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And 50 years ago, I chose to say, I want to follow you, Jesus, and do what you want. Have I done things perfectly? Absolutely not. Have I made choices that are not good choices? Absolutely. But this is one choice I never have regretted in all of my life, and that's to choose to follow him. And I love doing what I do here at Troy Christian, and I'm thankful for the last 35 years of being able to do that. There is no greater joy, there is no greater purpose for me than to be able to follow Jesus and tell others about Jesus. And that's why we're here today. And I'm thankful. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your encouragement in our lives, and thank you for loving each of us. And I pray that you would help us in those choices that we make, that those choices would be ones that honor you. Thank you again for the opportunity that we have of being in a Christian school. Thank you for the sacrifices that our parents made for us to be here. May we continue to be ones who follow you and make good choices. In Jesus' name.
Okay. I love watching you because you are great. Aren't they a great audience? Dr. Wilber, I'm especially proud, though, of all of you. I'm especially proud of the kindergartners because this was their first time to be at a chapel. We have a lot of kindergartners. Mrs. Allison and Miss Daycall and Miss Sheila and Mr. Johns, your kids did great this morning. It's hard to not sit there and be a little wiggly, but and then on the other end, I'm proud of the sixth graders because they spent the night at the school with their teachers and they were good listeners too. I don't think anybody fell asleep. So, good. Hey, we won't say you. Stood in the sunlight. If I call your name, then you get to join Dr. Wilber up here on stage and I get to read some lovely words about your character that your teacher wrote